Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we're going deep into something, well, pretty intensely personal. It's coping with your feelings, those feelings that come up when you're dealing with advanced cancer.
Yeah, it's a tough one for sure.
It really is. So we're gonna be looking at this guide from the National Cancer Institute, and we're gonna really face these emotions head on. No sugarcoating here.
It's about, recognizing those emotions, the really real and raw emotions that come up, and then figuring out how to navigate those, how to deal with them.
Exactly, yeah. And so in this deep dive, we really want to kind of distill those key insights from the guide and focus on, what you can control, right? Where you can find that strength in the middle of all this. And one thing I think that might surprise people, when they see this guide is that even with a terminal diagnosis, they emphasize that hope is still a really big part of things.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Hope changes. How hope evolves when you're dealing with advanced cancer. It's not just about remission anymore. It's about finding purpose, finding joy in those everyday moments.
Yeah, I can see how that might be a bit of a confusing concept for some people at first. Like how can you have hope when you're facing something so difficult? What does that even look like practically?
Well, the guide actually shares some really practical advice from people who are living with end-stage cancer.
Hmm.
And they talk about planning their days, right?
Yeah.
Like setting those little goals or events to look forward to, spending quality time with loved ones, continuing to do those things, those activities they enjoy.
So it's about those glimmers of light, right? Those moments of peace and connection that just make life feel meaningful, even when things are tough.
Exactly. Exactly. It's that focus on what you can control, cherishing those present moments and drawing strength from those things that matter the most.
It sounds like finding those silver linings, right? That's a key part of this journey. And I imagine those day-to-day experiences, it's probably a real emotional roller coaster. And the guide doesn't shy away from those tougher emotions like sadness and even depression.
Oh, absolutely. They normalize those feelings and say, look, it's totally natural to cry, to feel low energy, to have changes in your appetite. I mean, this is a heavy situation, right? So it makes sense those feelings would come up.
Yeah, it's tempting, isn't it, to just push those feelings down and try to put on a brave face. But it sounds like that's maybe not the healthiest way to go about it.
No, you're right. Suppressing emotions, it usually backfires in the end. And the guide makes a really important distinction between sadness and clinical depression. They say, look at that 2 week mark, right? If those feelings of sadness, hopelessness, loss of interest, if they're intense and they last more than 2 weeks, that could be a sign that it's, clinical depression.
So why is that 2 week mark so significant? Like what changes after that point?
Well, it's not like a magic switch or anything, but that 2 week period, it helps to tell the difference between they're just a natural grieving process and something that might actually need, some professional help, some intervention. If those feelings are really persistent, really debilitating, it's super important to reach out to your doctor.
Because even in the context of advanced cancer, depression is still treatable, right?
Exactly. Exactly. And there's absolutely no shame in getting help. In fact, it's a real sign of strength, of self-awareness.
Makes sense, yeah. It's about knowing your needs and advocating for yourself, for your well-being. And speaking of, these complex emotions, the guide also gets into grief and how grief it's not just sadness, right? It can show up in all these different ways.
That's a powerful point.
Hmm.
Grief, it's not a straight line. It comes and goes and it can pop up in these unexpected ways. Even your thought patterns, your daily routines can be affected.
And you can experience grief on all these different levels, right? There's the grief over the physical changes, the limitations on what you can do, plans that might have to change. And then of course, the thought of being separated from your loved ones.
Yeah, it's about recognizing those losses,
Yeah.
all those different losses you might be going through, and honoring them. And this is where self-care and support, they become so important.
Because if you're always trying to be strong for everyone else, you might forget to take care of yourself, to process those feelings.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
it's not selfish to prioritize your well-being, you know. It's essential. Allowing yourself to feel those emotions, to lean on those you trust, to seek professional help if you need it, that can make a huge difference in how you cope with grief.
And along with grief, I imagine fear and worry, those are pretty constant companions on this journey. The guide actually has a really moving quote from a guy named Ben who talks about that loneliness and fear, especially at night.
Yeah, he describes those quiet hours, when you're lying awake and the worries just seem to get bigger. It's like the weight of all those unknowns just presses down on you. And I think that's something a lot of people can relate to.
Especially when you think about all those uncertainties that come with end-stage cancer. There's the fear of losing control, becoming dependent on others, worrying about what'll happen to your loved ones, and then of course anxiety about pain, finances, and death itself.
All valid fears. And the guide recognizes that, but it offers these practical steps you can take to deal with those fears.
So it's not just about acknowledging the feelings, but about empowering people to take some control back where they can.
Right. Knowledge is power, right?
Okay.
So understanding your illness, understanding your treatment options, that can often help ease some of that fear. It's about, taking an active role in your own care.
And the guide even suggests getting your legal and financial affairs in order, which I know it might not be the most fun thing to think about, but it's a practical step that can bring a lot of peace of mind.
Oh, absolutely. Taking care of those practical matters can take a lot of anxiety off your plate and off your loved ones' plates too.
And maybe most importantly, the guide really emphasizes talking about those fears with someone you trust, whether it's a friend, family, therapist, support group, whatever feels right. But bottling those fears up, it only makes them feel more intense.
It's so true. Talking about them, even if you're just acknowledging them out loud, it can help take away some of their power. It lets you release some of that emotion and feel supported.
It's that reminder that you're not in this alone, right? And speaking of powerful emotions, anger is another one that comes up a lot in the guide. That feeling of why me, which is, so common. And it's understandable to be angry, to direct that anger at different things, maybe doctors, healthy people, even a higher power, if that's part of your belief system.
And it's interesting what the guide points out is that anger, it's often masking these deeper emotions like fear, frustration, helplessness.
So it's not just about being mad, it's those deeper feelings kind of bubbling up to the surface and sometimes coming out as anger.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. And it is important to find healthy ways to express those feelings. But the guide, it encourages you to do it in a way that doesn't, push people away. Talk it out, find some healthy outlets, but try to hold on to those connections, those relationships.
Because those connections, they can be such a lifeline, especially when those feelings of guilt and regret start to creep in. The guide talks about those common self-blame narratives, blaming your lifestyle choices, feeling guilty about treatment not working, regretting a delayed diagnosis, or even just not following medical advice perfectly.
It's like we try to find a reason,
Right.
someone or something to blame. But the truth is, sometimes these things they're out of our control.
And the guide puts it so well. It says treatment failed you, not the other way around.
Yeah, it's a good way to put it. It emphasizes that, cancer, it's complex, it's complicated. There are so many factors that influence how it goes. It's not about placing blame.
It's about accepting things as they are and focusing on what you can control.
Exactly.
And that includes, letting go of those perceived mistakes and forgiving yourself. We all make mistakes, right? And it's important to show ourselves the same grace and compassion we'd offer to anyone else.
It's true. We're all human.
Right.
And we're doing the best we can with what we've got.
And holding on to guilt and regret, it's exhausting. It keeps you from finding peace and making the most of the time you have.
So as hard as it might be, try to shift your focus away from what you can't change. Focus on those things you can control. Nurturing those relationships, following your passions, creating those meaningful experiences.
Speaking of meaningful experiences, the guide, it really highlights how important connection is during this time. And it talks about how loneliness can be a real struggle, even when you're surrounded by loved ones.
It's that feeling of being isolated, misunderstood, even when people are right there with you physically.
Yeah.
It's a weird paradox, and it can be really hard for both the person with cancer and their loved ones to understand.
And it's important to remember that you're not alone in feeling this way. A lot of people going through advanced cancer, they experience this too.
Absolutely. And the guide, it offers some good suggestions for dealing with that loneliness. It says, reach out, talk to people, let them know you need connection, whether it's family, friends, a support group, whatever feels right. It's about letting people know you want to connect, that you value their presence, their support.
And it's okay to be specific about what you need, right? Do you want to talk? Do you just need someone to listen? Do you just want to share a meal, watch a movie together?
Being clear about those needs, it helps the people around you know how to best support you. And remember, connection, it doesn't have to be face to face all the time. Phone calls, video chats, emails, even letters. Those can all be meaningful ways to stay connected with the people you love. It's about finding ways to bridge that distance, the physical distance and the emotional distance too.
Earlier, we were talking about inner strength, and I think it's easy to feel overwhelmed, helpless when you're facing a terminal diagnosis.
Oh yeah, for sure. But the guide reminds us that we all have this incredible strength inside us. It's about tapping into that resilience, that ability to cope and adapt even when things are really tough.
And inner strength, it's not about pretending everything's fine, putting on a brave face. It's about recognizing the hard stuff, the difficulties, but also recognizing your own ability to handle them, to get through them. It's about finding those ways to hold on to hope, to have purpose, to connect with people, even when things are really hard.
And remember, inner strength, it's not like a set thing you either have or you don't. It's something you can cultivate, something you can build up over time.
So how do we do that? How do we actually strengthen that resilience? What are some practical steps we can take to build that inner strength?
Yeah, that's a great question. And we're going to get into those concrete strategies. We'll be drawing insights from the NCI guide and some other great resources in the next part of our deep dive.
Sounds good. We'll be back after a quick break. We'll dig into those strategies and hopefully give you some tools to help you navigate these challenges and find those moments of peace and meaning along the way.
Welcome back, everyone. We've been talking about some pretty heavy stuff, but important stuff. And I hope this deep dive into the NCI's guide is being helpful so far. Before the break, we were talking about inner strength, and one thing that really stuck with me was how the guide emphasizes that it's not like, this superhuman ability. It's something you build, something you nurture.
So true. It's personal,
Yeah.
inner strength. And it grows and changes throughout our lives. It's about being resilient, being able to adapt, and finding those things that support you, that give you meaning, especially when times are tough.
And those sources of strength, they can be so different for different people. The guide gives some really interesting examples of how people cultivate that inner strength. And one that stood out to me was the idea of focusing on the present moment. Yeah, it's such a simple concept, but so powerful, right? When you're facing a terminal diagnosis, it's so easy to get stuck in the past, Yeah, the what ifs and all that, or to get anxious about the future. But the present moment, that's where you have some control. That's where you can make choices.
It's about recognizing that, okay, maybe you can't control everything that's happening, but you can control how you respond, how you experience those things.
Exactly. And that might mean, accepting that your routine has to change, finding joy in those simple everyday things, cherishing the connections you have with people. It's about shifting your attention to what you can appreciate right here, right now.
You mentioned earlier that setting goals, even small goals, can be a source of hope and purpose. But how do you set goals when you're dealing with a limited time frame? Doesn't that feel kind of, I don't know, counterintuitive?
Yeah, it's a good question. And it makes sense that it might feel a little strange.
Yeah.
You know, but the guide, it makes it clear that that goal setting in this context, it doesn't have to be about, planning some big trip around the world or something. It could be something as simple as, finishing that book you started, having a picnic in your backyard, having a really good conversation with someone you love.
It's about finding those things that give you that sense of accomplishment, that give your days some purpose, even when there's so much uncertainty.
Exactly. It's about creating those things to look forward to, no matter how big or small they are.
And the guide, it reminds us that those connections with loved ones, those are such a crucial part of this whole journey. Nurturing those relationships, that can be a huge source of strength.
Feeling loved, feeling understood, feeling supported, that makes such a difference. It's about letting yourself be vulnerable with the people who care about you. Don't try to go through this alone.
And you don't always have to be the strong one, right? It's okay to let people know what you need, whether
Mm.
it's, just someone to listen, someone to cry on, or just someone to laugh with.
Even if you're not, not feeling up to big social gatherings or anything, just a phone call, a text message, even just knowing that someone is thinking of you, that can be so comforting.
Yeah, those little acts of connection, they can really remind you that you're not alone, that people care.
Absolutely. It's about finding those ways to stay connected, to keep those relationships strong, even as even as things change.
We've talked a lot about the emotional side of things, but the guide also it touches on some really practical matters like getting your legal and financial affairs in order. That can be a big step in reducing anxiety and making sure your wishes are respected.
It's not the most fun topic to think about, but it is important, right? Making sure your will is up to date, figuring out power of attorney, talking about your end of life wishes, all of that can bring a sense of peace, a sense of control, especially during a time when things can feel very out of control.
It's about being proactive, taking care of those details, and that can free up, some mental and emotional space to focus on other things.
Exactly. It's
Yeah.
about taking those steps to protect yourself and your loved ones,
Yeah.
to make sure they're not burdened with extra stress and decisions during what's already a really hard time.
And speaking of taking care of things, we have to talk about self-care too. I know it can feel, I don't know, almost selfish to focus on your own needs when you're dealing with a serious illness, but the guide, it really emphasizes that self-care is even more crucial during this time.
It's not selfish at all. In fact, it's essential for your well-being, both physically and emotionally. It's about recognizing that you deserve care and compassion, especially when things are tough.
So what does self-care look like when we're talking about advanced cancer?
It can be a lot of different things.
Yeah.
It might be making sure you get enough rest, eating healthy foods, doing some gentle exercise, spending time doing things you enjoy. Could also be, relaxation techniques, journaling, spending time in nature, or just giving yourself some quiet time to reflect.
It's about finding what works for you, right? And making self-care a priority, not something you skip over. And it doesn't have to be this big production. Sometimes self-care is just, giving yourself permission to rest when you need to, or saying no to something that feels too overwhelming.
It's about listening to your body, listening to your emotions, and being kind to yourself.
Earlier we were talking about guilt and regret, those really common emotions that can come up during this journey. And the guide encourages us to really look at those self-blame narratives, to really explore those feelings.
Mm. Yeah, it's easy to get stuck in that blame game,
Yeah.
right? Blaming yourself for your lifestyle choices, feeling guilty that treatment isn't working, regretting decisions you made in the past. But the guide reminds us that, treatment failing you is not the same as you failing treatment.
And it makes it clear that cancer is complicated. There are so many things that affect how it develops, how it progresses. It's not about pointing fingers.
Right. It's about accepting the situation, the reality, and focusing on the things you can do something about.
And that includes letting go of those mistakes, forgiving yourself. We all make mistakes. And it's important to treat ourselves with the same kindness we'd offer to anyone else.
We are human, right? And we're all doing the best we can with what we know.
And holding on to all that guilt and regret, it weighs you down. It keeps you from finding peace and enjoying the time you have.
So as tough as it might be, try to let go of those things you can't change. Focus on what you can control. Build those relationships, do things you're passionate about, create those experiences that mean something to you.
Speaking of meaningful experiences, the guide really, really emphasizes how important connection is during this time. And it talks about how loneliness can be a real issue even when you have loved ones around you.
It's that sense of isolation, of not being understood, even when people are physically present. It's a strange thing, and it can be hard for everyone involved to wrap their heads around.
And it's important to remember that you're not alone in feeling that way. Lots of people facing advanced cancer, they experience this.
Absolutely. And the guide has some helpful tips for dealing with that loneliness. It encourages you to reach out, talk to
Mhm.
people. Let them know you need that connection, whether it's with family, friends, a support group, whatever feels right for you. It's about letting people know that you want to connect, that you value their presence, their support.
And it's okay to be upfront about what you need, you know? Do you want to have a conversation? Do you just need someone to listen? Do you just want to, have dinner together, watch a movie, something like that?
Being clear about your needs, it helps the people around you know how to best support you.
Mhm.
And don't forget, connection, it doesn't have to be face-to-face all the time. Phone calls, video chats, emails, letters, those can all be, meaningful ways to stay in touch with people. It's about finding ways to bridge that gap, the physical distance and the emotional distance too.
We were talking earlier about inner strength, and it's easy to feel helpless, overwhelmed when you're facing a terminal diagnosis.
It really is.
Yeah.
But the guide, it reminds us that we all have this amazing strength inside of us. It's about tapping into that resilience, that ability to cope, to adapt, even when things are really difficult.
And inner strength, it's not about putting on a brave face or pretending everything's okay. It's more about acknowledging the hard stuff, the challenges, but also recognizing that you have the ability to handle them, to get through them. It's about holding on to hope, having purpose, connecting with people, even when things are really, really tough.
And remember, inner strength, it's not it's not something you're just born with or you're not. It's something you develop, something you can build up over time.
So how do we do that? How do we actually strengthen that resilience? What are some practical things we can do to build that foundation of inner strength? We're going to dig into those strategies in the last part of our deep dive. We'll be drawing insights from the NCI guide as well as some other really valuable resources. Welcome back to our deep dive, everyone. As we've been talking about coping with feelings during advanced cancer and going through this NCI guide, I've been really struck by how much practical advice it actually offers, even when you're dealing with these really, really heavy emotions. Before the break, we were talking about inner strength, and it's kind of strange, isn't it? Trying to find strength when things are so difficult.
Yeah, it can definitely feel like a bit of a paradox. But one thing the guy does, it kind of reframes how we think about strength. It's not this, rigid, unyielding thing. It's more fluid,
Yeah.
It ebbs and flows, it changes as we go through life's challenges. And it gives some really, really good examples of how people find and cultivate their own inner strength. And one of the examples that really stood out to me was that emphasis on finding joy in the present moment.
Yeah.
Which, I don't know, it almost sounds too simple, right? Like is that really enough to create a sense of strength? I get what you mean. It might seem, I don't know, kind of counterintuitive.
Hmm.
But the guide, it really stresses how focusing on the present can actually be really empowering. Because when so much feels out of your control, the present moment, that's the one place where you do have a choice. You can choose how you respond to things, how you experience things, where you put your energy.
So it's about, instead of getting caught up in, the past, all those what ifs or worrying about the future, it's about looking for those things that bring you joy, that bring you peace right here, right now, even if they're small things.
Exactly. Exactly. For some people, it might be connecting with nature or spending time with loved ones, listening to music, being creative. It's about noticing those simple pleasures, those everyday moments, and really letting yourself, experience them fully.
We talked earlier about how setting goals can be a source of strength too, but how do you even approach goal setting when you're dealing with a limited time frame?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And the guide, it acknowledges that goal setting might look a little different in this context. It's not necessarily about those, big, ambitious, long-term goals. It's more about finding those things that you can realistically achieve, things that give your days meaning, that give you a sense of purpose.
So maybe instead of, planning that big trip around the world, it's finishing a book you started or planting a garden or having that deep conversation with someone you love that you've been putting off.
Right, right. It's about finding things that you can look forward to, things that help you feel like you're still moving forward, even if there are limitations.
Yeah.
And those goals, they can be really personal. What matters is that they mean something to you, that they bring you a sense of fulfillment.
And speaking of things that resonate, things that are meaningful, the guide, it really emphasizes how connected inner strength is to our values, our beliefs. It encourages us to really tap into those things, those sources of meaning that are already part of our lives.
It's about, drawing on those things that bring you comfort,
Hmm.
that bring you strength. So if faith is important to you, if that brings you solace, lean into that. If being in nature brings you peace, spend time outdoors. If creative expression helps you process your emotions, let yourself paint, write, play music, whatever it might be.
It's about finding those things, those activities, those practices that really nourish you, that remind you of what's important. And it's okay if those things change.
Yeah.
What helps you today might not be the same thing that helps you tomorrow.
Exactly. It's about being open to new ways of taking care of yourself, new ways of connecting with that inner strength.
And as much as it's important to focus on those internal sources of strength, the guide also reminds us that asking for help, seeking support from others, that's not a weakness. It's actually a sign of courage, a sign of self-awareness.
Absolutely. Whether it's, talking to a therapist, joining a support group, or seeking guidance from a spiritual advisor, whatever it might be,
Yeah.
reaching out, asking for help, that can make such a difference in how you navigate all of this.
It's recognizing that you don't have to go through this alone, that there are people out there who can offer guidance, who can support you, who can give you practical advice on how to cope.
These professionals, they can help you, build those coping skills, give you a safe place to process your emotions and connect you with resources that you might not even know about.
And remember, it's okay to feel it all, the sadness, the anger, the fear, the grief, but also those moments of joy, those moments of peace, even humor.
It's true. Those are all part of being human. And letting yourself feel them. That's part of how you process what you're going through. Don't try to, push those feelings down. Don't try to pretend they're not there. Let yourself be vulnerable. Let yourself express what you're feeling.
Because in that vulnerability, you might just find a strength, a resilience that you didn't even know you had.
You're not alone in this.
Mm.
And there is support out there every step of the way.
We really appreciate you joining us for this deep dive. It's a tough topic, it's a complex topic, and we hope that by exploring this NCI guide with you, we've been able to offer some insights, some validation, and maybe even some practical tools to help you navigate this emotional landscape of advanced cancer. As we wrap up, we'd like to leave you with this thought. What's one small thing you can do today just for yourself, something to take care of yourself or to connect with someone?
What will nourish you? What will remind you of that strength that you have inside? Remember, you have the strength to face these challenges.
Mm.
And you can find moments of peace, moments of meaning, even in the midst of it all.
Thank you for listening.